I am going to admit something that most people probably wouldn't. I'm a really awesome generalist. I know it sounds strange in a world where we are supposed to find our niche and claim it and share it all over social and digital media. But being a generalist is one of my superpowers, a Jill of all trades, if you will. I'm not going to continue the rest of that phrase. Do you need an event catered? Cool, I can do it, or I know people. Do you need a graphic made? Sure, I can do that. Do you need a pianist or a singer? Yes, but that was mostly for Dad when he was still serving churches and couldn't find anyone, but still. Do you need a website? I can help you with that. So I'm 40 years old. I'm working full-time at Vanderbilt Divinity School. I'm picking up hours at my local Starbucks as the store trainer. I'm doing pop-up restaurants at the farmer's market. I'm a mom, I'm a spouse, I'm a sister. And it can seem like a lot. And for a long while, I was criticized for being too busy. And there were moments where I would ask myself why also. But I didn't see it as busyness for the sake of being busy. One of the ways that I've been able to explain all of this to people is to say that I'm following my curiosity. To borrow from the poet Mary Oliver, tell me what it is you plan to do with your one wild and precious life. Why would we limit ourselves to one thing, one passion, one life's work, one true calling? The idea that there's this one thing we are supposed to do and be is reinforced at various stages in our life. It's asked to first elicit some cute response from kids like, I want to be an astronaut. But in our household, my spouse actually, Yuki, will ask Kai, who you've seen running around this week, where he will work when he grows up, and Kai will point to a NASA paraphernalia found in several places throughout our home or on our person. But then Yuki will quickly follow up with, but you can be whatever you want to be. But as you get older, this question of what do you want to be becomes less fun and increasingly anxiety-inducing as questions about what to do after high school are asked more frequently. And they don't stop there. It then becomes, what's your major? What type of job are you looking for? What are you going to do this summer? Do you have an internship lined up? What's the starting pay? Does it have benefits? At family gatherings, in the form of essays that you have to write for English class, in your guidance counselor's office, the questions continue like a drumbeat. What will you do with your one wild and precious life? But it also appears in our churches, in our youth groups, maybe from the pulpit. What's your call? What's your call story? For me, the question of call has always been an interesting one. It has been fluid with markers and guideposts along the way, in the form of conversations, relationships, opportunities. It was never one definitive moment that I wrote down in a journal or one experience at summer camp or even exploration. I didn't go to exploration. Instead, it was being attuned to the nudging of the Holy Spirit in the ways that she presented herself. Even as a deaconess now, I'm still listening and watching for those opportunities where my gifts, or my gladness, as Biegner puts it, intersects with the world's needs and where I can join work already in progress. So right now that intersection looks like communication ministry, but over the course of the last 4 years, it has also involved food. For as much as I love to make food and invite others to partake, as I will this evening, I have no culinary background or formal training. But don't let that fact that I'm in charge of our closing dinner alarm you. I've had tons of practice since. I don't have good knife technique. I don't know the names for sauces and roux, and in fact, I had to spell check the word roux. And if I'm honest, a lot of what I do is a little research, a lot of recalling matriarchs, prep and cook, and even more trial and error. Trial and error and preparation. My fond memories of food include gathering at my aunt's house in Navotas, outside of Metro Manila, on a Saturday afternoon. She probably had a combined living room and kitchen space of about 10 by 10 square feet. With fresh ingredients purchased from the local public market, we would assemble everything together. We would roll the lumpia with minced shrimp and pork and onions, and I would take mental notes of how it was done, wondering if I could recreate the same taste and crispiness if I did it on my own. Or my dad making this special version of pancit, a rice noodle dish his hometown is famous for because of the seafood that adorns it. Or my grandmother cooking in a wok 3 times the size of my face, like my actual face right now, sauteing freshly chopped veggies over the outdoor stove, pickling radishes and tasting to see if it was just the right balance of salty and sweet, even catching a chicken in the backyard to cook for dinner, which was not traumatic at all for a child. Food, at least for me, has a way of holding my memories. The smells, the tastes, the stories that are shared around the table, eating with our hands out of bowls, dipping things in sauces, together are able to communicate something that at times words cannot. I was maybe 12 at the time, and we were living in the Philippines when these memories were etched. But nearly 30 years later, there's something that continues to call me back to the art of gathering. The gathering of ingredients, the recalling of recipes, the sharing of a meal or drink, or drinks. In these practices so mundane, something extraordinary is experienced and exchanged, and we leave nourished and somehow transformed. After I left my role at United Methodist Communications in 2015, I was beginning to entertain this nudging. Since there wasn't a presence of Filipino food, mostly in the state, where I had lived for about the last 3 years, why not try my hand at creating some events where Filipino food could be showcased and begin tending to this growing desire to facilitate the exchange of culture and ideas through food. The joy that came out of making food for people and creating spaces to gather kept finding its way back to me, or I to it. And naturally, as my patterns had revealed, I followed my curiosity and said yes to the what if. Within a week, I had secured a business license, the necessary tax things, and signed an agreement with the farmer's market to be a resident in their incubator kitchen. I had found my niche, and I shared it on social media. I loved interacting with folks to whom I served food. Aunties, second-generation young professionals who didn't realize how much they missed food from their family parties. Those who only knew of Filipino food from their friends and neighbors growing up who would invite them over. People curious because they had never heard of it before. Even the custodial staff who I would send home with any leftovers. For those who got to dine with me, food was also memory. And as I wavered between continuing the residency into the year with the intensity with which I began, other things started nudging me too. Retirement, benefits, how long I wanted to keep up the hustle. All the things that remind us that these passions we pursue are rarely income generating. And so I went back to full-time work and moved the food venture to the occasional pop-up and festival. I still maintained that food was an opportunity to build community, to experience the incarnation, to identify with people at the most basic and human level. So I partnered with others who wanted to do the same and curated events that allowed culture, identity, organizing to find a home. But doing these events occasionally left me wanting, and the customers who I had gotten to know to wonder what happened. And so in November of this last year, 2 years after I had stopped doing the residency at the farmer's market, I started feeling the restlessness come on and asked myself again, what made me happy? What brought me joy? Where was it that my gifts could be of service to the world? And it just so happened that the market was revamping their residency program, and they were seeking applicants. And so I filled out that application, and last month I learned that I was accepted to be a resident again. It's not a full-time commitment, but it is again an opportunity to try an idea that brings me joy, and that seemed to do the same for others in the meals that I made. Learning to cook Filipino food, and I imagine a lot of other types of food, there were no recipes to follow. In fact, when we talk about cooking in the Philippines, we don't ask what's the recipe, we say anong timpla, which roughly translates to what's the mix or what's the blend. Cooking, unlike baking, is very forgiving. Anyone who has tried to just mix some things together and have something beautiful come out of the oven will be disappointed, very sad. By testing things out and tweaking as I went, by trial and error, continuous improvement, as my spouse would say in his line of work, you find the things that work well together, that make a beautiful, sort of harmonious, and maybe sometimes dissonant flavor profile. And I found that there's something freeing in knowing that finding what we enjoy, whether it's a new favorite food or vocational path, is a series of mixes and blends, of trying things on to see what sticks. Our passions, our calls, our careers aren't a fixed mark, though some might convince you it is, or some place that we arrive. They are cultivated and developed. They are nurtured. They are tended to, and in my case, made real with the loving support of family and friends and community. My love for and craft of food making has only grown deeper as I've examined my own relationship with food and culture, access and privilege, where it comes from and who grows it. This food adventure was only able to develop as it has because I leaned into my curiosity. I dabbled a lot. I tried on things to see what would fit and what would stick. Whenever I make rice before an event, and there is always a lot of rice, there is a bit of ritual that I engage and invite you to consider doing something similar as you shop for ingredients, as you prepare your food, as you sit down for a meal. What has made this even more meaningful in past years is finding out that our last name, Agtarap, means to winnow rice. And so if you haven't seen what rice looks like after it comes out of the ground, it still has a hull or a husk on it, and so you have to winnow it to separate it from the actual kernel of rice that you eat. So finding this out, I feel like I am living into my name. As I prepare to cook the rice, I fill a pot with water and begin to feel the grains of rice between my fingers, massaging them and watching as the water goes from cloudy to clear. As I wash the rice, I give thanks for the soil and the sun that helped it to grow, for the farmers who till the soil and those who cut and winnow the grains. I pray over those who live in the countries who produce the rice, yet cannot afford to buy more than what they need for one meal. I give thanks for all it took to arrive in my kitchen, for those who would take their seats at the table, for conversations that would maybe turn into meetups and friendships weeks and months down the road, for eyes open to an immigrant group that is little known in Tennessee, but is the top 4 largest origin countries for immigrants in the United States. I begin my residency shortly after I return back to Nashville, and as I do that, a new community called The Feast, through my home church at McKendree, is also beginning to coalesce, as we attempt to offer a new but old way to gather through the breaking of the bread. There are people like me all over the place, in your churches, in your families. You might even be one. We even have a name for this group. We are called multi-potentialites. There are many TED Talks about it, so Google that later. We have lots of interests and want to pursue so many of them. We love exploring, mastering new skills, bringing disparate ideas together. Find us. I'll likely keep my role at Starbucks training new partners because it teaches me empathy and hospitality. And my questions about what happens next will still be there, and will likely be there for many years to come. And I will continue to follow that curiosity. I have promised some people I will not pick up any more new jobs. But for now, my curiosity about where this work will lead, that I most need to do, and where the world needs to have done, meet. Kingdom building is really that simple. It is building a bigger table. It is adding more chairs and table settings as if the latecomers had already RSVP'd to your event. And then we eat.